Peace, Infinite Waters diving deep once again. Today we have a very, very special guest, former NASA physicist, Tom Campbell, author, consciousness researcher, and I'm so thankful that you could join Infinite Waters diving deep. Your message is so powerful. I definitely thank you for all the work, and I had to bring you on Infinite Waters just to really spread some light on your work to the masses who are here. And a lot of people haven't heard of you, haven't heard of your work, and I would love for you just to really give a brief introduction to who you are and the work that you do.
Okay, well, as you said, I'm Tom Campbell. I'm a physicist. Um, I have had two careers, both at the same time, running parallel. My day job was as a physicist, and I worked for missile defense. I worked for NASA. I worked for several companies as a physicist. And all the time that I was working the day job, I also had a night job. And I would put my 40 hours into the day job, and then I'd probably put about 15 to 20 hours into the night job. So that left very little time for the family and the life that I had otherwise. So I was a busy guy for many, many years, but now I'm retired, so now I have a lot more time. In any case, what I have done that your audience may find interesting is that as a physicist, when I discovered that reality was a whole lot more than the physical world that physics would, let us think that it is. Physicists just think the world is matter. That's it. But there's a whole lot more that matters, a whole lot more than matter. And that is the world of intuition. That's the world of spirit. That's the world of joy and justice and creativity. All of those things are non-physical. And they are the most important things. And when I had a paranormal experience of where I was able to debug computer code in my mind, rather than staring it out, I could see the lines of code that had errors in them would turn red. And I wrote the code so I knew what each line meant. And I go check that line, and sure enough, it had an error in it. And it would have taken me weeks to do that, actually, just using my intellect. But using my intuition, I could do it 100 times faster and more accurately. I could even find those errors that were just the key punched the hole in the card just a little off center. The line was perfectly crafted, but the key punch had a little error. So there was no way to tell that, really. You couldn't tell it by looking at it, but they'd show up red just like all the rest of the errors, and I was able to fix them. So I knew that there was another part to reality other than just the physical part, and that other part was very powerful, very important, and was actually the more important part of our life. The physical reality is like the props on a stage. Nobody goes to a play to watch the props. You go to the play to hear what the actors are saying and what they're feeling and what they're portraying. That's why you go to a play. Well, physicists would have us think that there's nothing here but the props. Then
Right.
That's not the case. That part of life that is most valuable to us is the part that has to do with love, has to do with caring, has to do with how we make the choices that we make. It has to do with cooperation. It's all those things, beauty, all those things that make a big difference to us are not physical things.
Right.
Those things are all things that are part of our subjective life, not just our objective life.
And did you know this from a child, or you only knew it later on in life? Did you always have this intuition about the nature of reality from a young child, or during childhood, was there an event that happened to you that made you kind of have a different perception on reality?
Yeah, both. When I was like 7 years old, 6 or 7, I had non-physical entities come to me and help me go out of body. And I thought that was a lot of fun because I could float out through the window and down in the yard. right through the bushes. And the first time I did that, I scrunched up in a ball. No, I'm going to crash into the bushes, but I went right through them. And anyway, so they taught me how to do that, and they gave me training courses. And it was a very odd thing because when I was out of the body, I was like a 25-year-old. I was a young adult. When I go back into my body, I was a 7-year-old. And watching and feeling that transition take place, was really kind of an amazing experience all by itself. But then, after about a year of that training, they shut me out and they said, "We don't want you to grow up to be too weird a kid, or they'll put you in an institution. We need to keep you, like a normal child, so you'll have a better experience." So they cut it off. And then, when I was in my late 20s, I ran into Robert Monroe. And Robert Monroe, maybe you people know, wrote the books Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, and Ultimate Journey. And I ran into him before there was a Monroe Institute, before the land and TMI didn't exist. So I knew him about 10 years before that. We spent 15 to 20 hours together, Bob and myself and Dennis Merrick, an electrical engineer. So we built the equipment in his lab, and he came and taught us about out of body. And about 6 months or 7 months or so into that, I found it real easy. I could get out of body very easily whenever I wanted to. And one day, Bob was telling me about this series of tests that were given to him while he was out of body, things he was supposed to do or know or be. And I stopped him after the very first description. And at that point, all the stuff that I learned when I was 7 years old poured back into my mind again, like the door was back open. And I stopped him and I said, "Bob, wait a minute. This is going to be your second thing that they did." And I told him. Bob's mouth dropped open and was like, "Well, how'd you know? Were you there?" And I said, "No, I took that same test a long time ago when I was 7 years old." And then he told the next one, and I told the next one, and we shared each other test questions back and forth. And sure enough, right up to the last one, where the test ended, either because we both made a wrong answer or because that was the end of the test, I don't know. But anyway, so then it all came back, and my memories of all of that were just as clear as they were when it happened. So that's kind of my past experience, what got me here. And then as a graduate student in physics working on my PhD is when I learned how to meditate, transcendental meditation. That was simple. First time I tried, I was gone. And what I thought was like 10 or 15 minutes went by, and I found out it was almost an hour had passed. So I was just a natural for it. And one thing led to another, and eventually I had studied with Bob in Bob's lab enough about what are the paranormal things? What does paranormal? How does these things happen? How can you heal? How can you remote view? How can you communicate mind to mind? How do those things work? I'm a physicist. I want to know, how does it work? And I know it doesn't always work. Sometimes it works better than others. And why? So I started to study it. I'd go into those out of body states, those altered consciousness states, and I'd change a variable. I'd say, okay, I'm going to change this variable. I'm going to do it again and see what changes. Well, if nothing changes, then that variable's not important. So I changed a different variable. And I did that for about 35 years, just changing variables, seeing what made what work and what made it worse, what made it better. And at the end of that, I felt like I really understood consciousness, what it was and where it came from. And that's when I sat down to try to write these books.
Right. And I love that book, My Big Toe, Theory of Everything. And it's fascinating. How did you go from being a physicist working for NASA to really having the courage to really, you know, shed light on these breakthrough insights that you've had? Because a lot of people, they're scared to kind of go against the grain and really show the world what the world hasn't seen before. So how did you have the courage to not be labeled weird or crazy or, amongst your peers as well, people in your own community?
Well, I just never had a problem with that. As you grow up, as you evolve, I say evolve the quality of your consciousness. One of the things that you realize, the biggest problem is fear. Fear is the problem that brings us down. Fear is the problem that creates all of our difficulties for us. If we just didn't have that fear, that ego, those beliefs, then our life would be really, really good. So as I grew through this process of learning about the larger reality, learning about love, learning about don't try to control things. You have to kind of let all that go. So by the time I was, say, working at NASA, uh, I had already let go of all of that. I had my books; they were out there, and I figured that the world knew. The world knew. I deal with it. I just didn't have any fear around it. So it just didn't matter to me. And matter of fact, when I first went to work at NASA, I had a couple of kids come up to me. I call them kids. They were fresh out of school, probably in their early middle 20s. And one of them walked up to me and he said, "Are you the Tom Campbell?" And I said, "Well, maybe. Which the Tom Campbell are you talking about?" And they said, "The one that was on Coast to Coast." And I said, "Yep, that's me." So it turned out that my cover was blown, but it didn't make any difference. These kids surrounded me every day when I come to work and peppered me with questions. And there wasn't any problem. So it didn't interfere with my work. But by then, I had a reputation for being able to do things that other people couldn't do, because I not only worked with my intellect, but I worked with my intuition. So I could solve problems that didn't have any obvious answers, because you always can find answers on the intuitive side, even if your intellect can't find it because there's too many variables. So my job was pretty secure because there wasn't anybody else that really knew how to do it. So
Right.
I didn't worry too much about the details. So I just I put it all out there because I thought it would be helpful to people to understand the nature of this reality, what it's all about. And Ralph, the work that you do is very much in line with what I've discovered and what I do. We're both kind of
We're deep
saying
divers.
similar. Yeah, we're both saying very similar things to people. It's get rid of your fears, get rid of your beliefs. It's about love. It's about caring. It's about being cooperative. It's that's I call that growing up. You grow up when you get rid of your self-centeredness and you think about others rather than just what's in it for me. What's good for me, and
Right.
not caring about others so much. That creates all your trouble.
Yes.
If you are a person of love and not fear, then your life is beautiful. Everything you need just kind of falls at your feet just as you need it. It's amazing how that works.
Yes. And with your work, you talk about how consciousness is the fundamental building block for reality,
Mhm.
to reality. So, someone who's never heard your work before, what is reality in a nutshell? Because we're often kind of told what reality is from the media, through our five senses, taste, touch, all of these things. In your mind, what is reality for, a definition for the average Joe on the street?
Okay. Well, reality. Well, let me say it first, very short, but it'll be hard to understand, and then I'll elaborate a little bit. Reality is information. Reality is information, and consciousness is fundamental. There isn't anything more fundamental than consciousness, and everything else is derived from consciousness. That's what it means to be fundamental, is that everything else comes from consciousness. So the people who believed this a long time ago, starting with Plato and his analogy of the cave, that the real world isn't really the real world. That's just like shadows on the cave wall. That's a kind of a famous thing. Um, they were called idealists, and the idealists always had this problem. Well, if consciousness is fundamental, then how can we derive physics from consciousness? And they couldn't do that, but I can. So that's the difference. I can derive quantum physics and relativity of just understanding the nature of consciousness. And in doing that, I can answer questions and solve paradoxes that the physicists can't solve. Like physicists don't know why the speed of light is always a constant. How come the speed of light just always goes at the same constant velocity? It doesn't matter how fast the flashlight's going, But when you turn that flashlight on, the light's just going to go at the same speed, whether the flashlight's going forward or backwards or sitting still. It doesn't matter what the source is doing. So that nothing else works that way. But I can explain that. It's a simple explanation, logical explanation. Why quantum physics says that when you dig down deep into reality, what you get is probability, not matter. You don't get little chunks of matter, you get probability distributions. So I can also explain that. Plus, there's another almost 40 other things in both physics, philosophy, metaphysics that are called paradoxes, things we know are true, but we don't know why they're true. We don't understand why they're like that. And this model of mine explains all those things. So it's just a better physics. And one day, this idea of mine will become the next big paradigm shift in physics and in philosophy.
Right.
It'll,
And what would you
yeah.
say the implications are, for your theory in terms of how is it going to impact people's lives when they know this? How is it going to change the fabric of the world, how people interact and everything compared to what it is right now?
Ralph, you ask really great questions.
Thank you.
That is exactly the thing. Before, all the big paradigm shifts in science have never really meant a whole lot to the individual guy. Whether the world is flat or round, or whether the Earth is at the center of the universe or not, doesn't really help the guy who's out there struggling to make a living. Do any better. He just doesn't care about the details of physics. But this new paradigm shift, when it happens, is going to affect the people in the street even more than it affects the scientists. This will change everything, and here's why. We have in our culture just an underlying belief. I call it a cultural belief. People don't tell you that this is a material reality. You just get it out of your culture. Yeah, it's all about the stuff, physical reality, the physical universe. That's it. That's all there is. That's what you hear. And everybody kind of takes that belief on. And now there's an ethic that goes with that belief. The ethic is that if this is a physical reality, then that physical stuff is just out there. Anybody can grab as much of it as they can grab. They may have to fight to keep it, but they can grab it and it's theirs. They can sell it. They can keep it for themselves. So the whole ethic that goes with materialism is control, power, force. That's how you get someplace. If you don't have any control, and you don't have any power, and you can't exert any force, well, you end up at the bottom of the pile. You just have a hard time even existing. But if you get some power, you get some control. The power gives you control, and the force is what the power does to fix things for you. And what is that in our culture? What is that control, power, force? That's money. If you have money, you have power, you have control, you can exert force. So that's the ethic of materialism: control, power, force. Whatever you can grab is yours, and you can rise to the top or bottom based on how many people you walk over, how much you can rip off. It doesn't matter. That's how you get there: control, power, and force. But the ethic of my understanding of reality, the ethic is love, caring, cooperation, helping each other. Now, with that ethic, our culture will change a lot. Look at the news. Look at the way the world is, and you'll see control, power, force is all over it. That's why we are the way we are, because our ethic, we learn from our culture, says that's the way it is. That's just the way the world works. And if you're on the bottom, well, that's just the way you are. Suck it up and deal with it. And if you're on top, well, lucky you. You happen to be at the right place at the right time. And it's not, if people see that as just the natural way of reality, those on top, those on the bottom, and that's wrong. It's not that way. Control, power, force isn't the way to live. The way to live is with caring, sharing, love, helping. Ask, how can I help? What can I do? Not what's in it for me. That's the difference in the ethics. So just imagine if the basic ethic in our culture was not control, power, force, but was sharing, helping, loving, caring. Wow, that would
Right.
make a huge difference. That would change everything. and the institutions would change. The people have to change first. Then the institutions would change. Everything would change. And we would live in a place where everybody could express themselves and grow to the point of which they're capable of growing.
Are
And
there are there
everybody,
forces are there forces which don't want this paradigm shift in your mind? Is there a conspiracy or not really? Because some people believe that some people know about this and they don't want to share information. They want to keep it for themselves. Or do you believe that um, no one has that power? It's just a process. Or do you
yeah,
believe that
well,
they're gatekeepers and people who are, you know, holding the key to certain of humanity's freedoms?
yeah, well, there's a little bit of both. If we talk about humans, okay, people that are here, then none of them really have the power to change anything that big. They can slow things down, but they can't stop it from happening. So
Yes.
they don't have the power to make any big changes. Now, if we talk about within consciousness itself, yes, there are some negative forces in there that would like it not to go that way. There are entities who have evolved to the negative side, which is they're basically like chaos, and there are those, but they also will lose. They're weak compared to the forces that are positive. It's like that. If you are descending on the negative side, what happens is you descend, 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 descend. But once you get to a certain point, your own negativity starts to destroy yourself. In other words, the negative side is self-defeating. Look at the big dictators, and they rule with fear. How long do they last? Not very long.
Right.
They get torn down by somebody else who takes over. Now they're the big dictator, and they don't last very long because there's always somebody else who wants to knock that top guy off so he can be top guy. So the whole thing is unstable. Negativity can only build up and get so strong before it self-destructs. And that's true of humans. That's just true in general. Whereas the positive side just keeps getting better and better and better. It goes up and up. There isn't any ceiling. We don't hit a ceiling that says, "Oh, you're so good that you have to become bad." No, that doesn't happen that way. But you're so bad that you become self-destructive. Yes, it does happen that way. And it always happens that way. The negative side eventually will self destruct. Now, it may take a century or two or a millennia, but we'll get there. So eventually, we will get to this kinder, gentler place where everybody's can optimize whatever talents they have. Everybody will be helping everybody else get what they need and what they have to have. So that will be good, but it's going to be a rocky road to get there. Even if this model of love and peace and sharing, were mainstream today, it's still going to take 2 or 3 decades before humanity can make that transition. But I think that's where we're going. I think in 2 or 3 decades, this model of mine is just better physics. It will come about. And then the logic says that love is the answer, that control power force is wrong, that's destructive. So I think we have very good times ahead, and I'm hoping it won't take a millennia. I'm hoping it's
Yes.
only going to take a few decades. But the
Right.
decades are going to be rough because when you have a major transition over a very short amount of time, then it's going to be rough and tumble. People will get hurt. Things will happen. Because, yes, the people right now who are on the top of the pile, they're going to try to maintain that status quo. And they're going to do whatever they can to do that. But if these ideas go mainstream, they can't, the people, who said that? It may have been even Mayo, I don't know, but somebody said the power is in the people. And that's true.
Yes.
If us, we're what, 1 million strong, if even 1 billion of us understands these ideas, then the rest will come along because when you do understand these ideas, everything gets better. Your relationships get better. Your world gets better. Your job gets better. Everything starts to get better. And just 10% of the population will drag the other 90% with it in probably less than a decade. So
Right.
we don't
So,
have
so
to
we,
we don't
we
have to
often
convince
see,
everybody.
right, we often see in society that there's a lot of division, whether it's through race, religion, political party. Is this all caused by um, this version of reality that we have currently?
No, it's not this version of reality. It's all caused by our belief
Okay.
that that the world is basically material, and that a belief in materialism, a belief that it's the nature of things that some people are on top and some people are on the bottom, and there's just nothing can be done about that. It's a really tight struggle, but what do they call that? Social Darwinism. All the people on top, well, they're on top because they belong on top, and all the people on the bottom are down there because they belong on the bottom. Well, that's nonsense. That's total and complete nonsense. So it's not that it's the reality. It's the way we see the reality. When we have that ethic that this is the way reality is, people can abuse each other. People can lie, cheat, steal, and if they can get away with it, if they can do it in a way that it's not illegal, well, good for them. They get to take your money and not give you anything for it. You're a bank and you say, well, we're going to charge $30 for an overdraft fee. Well, the bank doesn't have to do any work. It's all done in the computer. There's no banker even spends a second on that. It's all done in the computer. So the cost to the bank is zero. They just send out a message. They don't even send out the message. The computer does that too. So the cost is basically zero, yet they'll charge $50 for it. See, that's doing something legal, that's stealing money. You take people's money and you don't have to do anything for it. So that's all through our culture. There's everybody out there trying to grab as much money as they can. That's greed. And you get that greed through this cultural belief we have that the world is a material world, and that's the nature of it. The big animals eat the small animals, and that's not the nature of it. Life, reality doesn't work that way. Reality is, I guess, to answer your first question is what is reality in a small bite? And that is, reality is computed within consciousness. This reality that we think is physical, this physical universe, is a virtual reality computed by consciousness. Now that sounds really, really crazy. And a lot of people hear that and they go, oh, that's really out there. But it's not. If you think about uh, you know, what is consciousness? What's the attributes of consciousness? Well, consciousness, I define it as awareness with a choice. So what does it mean that you have a choice? Well, it means you have free will, for one thing. But it means that you have time for another, before the choice and after the choice. But if awareness with a choice means that you get data input, that's what our five senses do. They gather data. Then they process that data. What does it mean? And they compare it to memory. Okay, and then after they compare it to memory, they make a choice about what to do about that data that came in through their senses. Well, what is it that that has input, processes the input, uses memory, and then has an output? That's an information system. That's what information systems do. So consciousness can best be modeled as an information system. That's what it is. And if you think of the larger consciousness system, that's source. That's what a lot of religious people call God. It's consciousness. It's the source of everything. Here we are, a piece of consciousness. We're not a human being. We're a piece of consciousness playing an avatar of a human being. So we are really consciousness. And when that avatar, that human dies, we don't die. We're immortal. We go on. Then we pick another human being to make their choices. See, that's what the player does in a virtual reality. The player makes all the choices for the avatar. That's all the decisions. That's what's important. It's the choices you make. So it's the piece of consciousness that's making those choices. The avatar is just a virtual reality created by the larger conscious system, which is an information system. It can configure part of itself to be the server for that virtual reality. And it does that to give us a place to make really important choices. So we have to, life gives us all sorts of challenges, and we have to deal with those challenges and make choices. And by the
Right.
choices we make, we either evolve the quality of our consciousness, we level up, or we evolve the quality of our consciousness, we level down, we lose level. So if you think of it in terms of that virtual reality game idea, we are pieces of consciousness playing human avatars so that we can learn to make better choices toward love and caring and helpfulness. So that's what reality is in a nutshell.
And what if someone says, we created this human game that we're in right now, this kind of virtual reality with laws and you know countries and borders and everything. We created this consciousness created this.
Yeah.
um what is it going to take for us to have something new if we
Okay.
actually
Well,
created this in the first place?
yeah, it's true that we created. It's not the consciousness created it. Well, yes, consciousness created by the choices they make. That way, all the pieces of consciousness created by the choices they make, because the consciousness is not very grown up yet. It's still trying to evolve. Evolved consciousness is just pure love,
Yes.
and consciousness that's not evolved is full of fear and ego and beliefs. It tends to be destructive, self-destructive, and destructive with others. So we are here with free will. And free will is pretty sacred. The system doesn't override our free will. So we come here and we're not very grown up and we have to make choices. Those choices, help us evolve or de-evolve. And we make a lot of bad choices because this is not a graduate school. This is not even a high school. This is like an elementary school or a daycare, where all the children run around with scissors and grab toys from each other. It's that kind of thing. We're like a daycare, and we make a lot of bad choices. And when we do, we create a lot of negative stuff. So we create, very dysfunctional things because we tend to be pretty dysfunctional pieces of consciousness because we haven't grown up yet. You got to start at the bottom and work your way up. You don't get to start at the top. You have to start at the bottom and work your way up. So what we've created now is a very good example of the level of our collective consciousness. So if you look at all the humans in the world, what's their level of consciousness? Well, it's not very good because if you look at the world, it's pretty rotten. There's a lot of dysfunction going on there, a lot of hate, a lot of negativity, a lot of greed. All of that control, power, force stuff is what we have to outgrow. That's what we need to come out of. And we're making progress. If you look, let's go back 500 years. What was it like in this virtual reality to be a human 500 years ago? Well, then life was very cheap. The powerful could just take you out just because they thought it was fun and nothing would happen. It was a lot harder than it is now. I mean, there's still terrible things going on in the world, but we've made a lot of progress. We've found, representative government rather than just having a dictator tell us what we have to do and killing us if he doesn't like us. So we've made a lot of progress toward kinder and gentler, but we've got a long way to go
Right.
before we're done, But so we created it, and as soon as we grow up and let go of that fear and that ego and the beliefs, this place will start to get nicer and happier. People will treat each other with respect rather than who's higher and lower than who's better, who works for who. It's going to be everybody will get respect from everybody else. We'll all just be people, equal people living together, trying to optimize reality for everyone. And that sounds like, yeah, that'll never happen, but just the opposite. It will happen. It absolutely will happen, has to happen, because that's how consciousness evolves. It evolves from higher entropy to lower entropy, and that means from chaos to love. That's the way it evolves. Now, evolution is slow. Evolution takes a long time to change, but it's also relentless. It just keeps chugging on. You can set it back. You can make some really bad choices and set it back, but it'll turn around and just keep chugging. So eventually we'll get there. We will
Right.
live in this kind and gentle place.
So in this virtual reality, for a lot of people, they don't feel worthy as a human being unless they have a lot of money, a good job, a big mansion. What do you say to someone who doesn't have a lot of money or who doesn't have that massive mansion on the hill, when they're feeling inadequate, when they compare themselves to other people in the world of prestige and all of these people? What would you tell them that they need to hear right now?
Well, I would tell them that value has nothing to do with money. Value as a human value has nothing to do with prestige. Value has to do about what you are inside, the kind of person you are, the kind of human you are. Are you a kind? Are you a caring? Do you look after other people? Are you helpful? Is it what can I do? How can I help rather than what's in it for me? If you're that kind of a person, you have high value. And you have high value to the larger consciousness system. And you're up here. And the person that's greedy, the person, he may be wealthy, he may have a lot of prestige in our culture because our culture is such low quality. He may have that there, but that's just local. He's not. His value is very low, and it's the value of the being. It's not what you do that makes you valuable. It's what you are. It's who you are inside. That's where value is. So if you are a kind, caring person, then you are a person of value, and you're a person of interest to the larger consciousness system. And you'll find those things that help you get by. Now, I have friends and people that I've known and spent a lot of time with who were some of the nicest and most valuable people on the planet, and they were dirt poor. There were five of them, and they lived in a house that probably had 200 square feet. It was very, very poor people. He was an automobile mechanic, and he didn't work for a company because he couldn't stand the way they cheated their customers. So he just set up he worked under a shade tree mechanic. He worked off the side of his house, and he lived in the country, and he did that. But very high quality people. And my kids and my wife and I, we spent time with them because we enjoyed them, and they enjoyed us. So people of quality are everywhere. They're among us. People who are of low quality are everywhere too. And I'd say to a person that's feeling like they're not worthy, that's because of fear. You feel unworthy because you're fearful. I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. You need to get rid of that fear. Fear is the problem. If you get rid of the fear, then you don't have that problem of being unworthy. If you get rid of the fear, then I'm okay, because my value comes from the quality of the person inside. And I can deal with whatever I have to deal with. I'm going to deal with it with grace and with positiveness. So if I get something and it's really a hard thing, a tough thing, well, I'll deal with it with quality, with high quality, with positiveness. I'll just deal with it. And you can be happy, whatever it is you do. Whether you're a shade tree mechanic or you sit on a stump and watch your sheep graze, whatever you do, you can be a very high quality person. It depends on the quality that's here, which is really your consciousness. That's what's important. Now, in a world that's based on control, power, force, now money is the thing that makes you feel worthy. You got a lot of money, then you're worthy, because that gives you control, gives you power, and money is a force. But once you let that go as dysfunctional nonsense, then you can kind of set that scale of how do you judge yourself. Well, here's a good way. If people want to take a test on what their quality of consciousness is, just think about the last couple of days, the last 2 or 3 days. How often during those last 2 or 3 days did you have negative feelings? Did you feel unhappy, abused, not good enough, angry, upset? stressed. All of those things are negative emotions. And most people, if they think back, they'll say, I don't have to think back 2 days. I only have to think back about 10 minutes. And I can find, I'm annoyed, I'm angry, I'm upset. This isn't the way I like it. And those are all negative thoughts. And if you get rid of your fear, which the ego and the beliefs come out of that fear, if you get rid of that, you won't have any of those negative things. You'll live a life, and your life will be positive from sun up to sundown. Even when you get the short end of the stick, even if somebody, insults you, you won't think, oh, something wrong with me. You'll think that insult doesn't have anything to do with you. It has to do with them. They're angry. They're negative. That's why they insult you, not because there's anything wrong with you. They're making a statement about how ungrown they are. So at that point, you can deal with things, and you can deal with them in a positive way. And when you do that, things just start to break for you. When you act that way, suddenly that job comes along that you wished for but never could quite get. Your relationships get better with everyone. And your life just tends to turn around and get better day by day because you see everything in a positive way. You're happy. You're okay. It doesn't matter whether your house has pretty tile floors or whether it has a dirt floor, because you and your family are happy. You get to buy. There's nobody starving, and life is good because there's love, there's caring, there's connection. And that's what's really important. The money, power, control force is a dysfunctional concept. We need to let that go. So for the people that feel down, they just need to change their attitude. They need to say, it's not what outside that matters. That status comes from having that Mercedes Benz in the driveway. No. Your value comes from who you are inside. And how do you grow that value? You have to change who you are. You have to change who you are inside so that you don't react to that insult, because you know it's their problem, not your problem, because you're always doing kind things and nice things and helpful things. And if somebody else looks down at you, that's their problem. They're not showing much value. They're showing poverty of value. The person, no matter how wealthy or poor they are, can show the richness of value as well. And people will see it and notice it. So that's what I would say. We're not graded on how much money we have. The larger conscious system couldn't care less whether you were rich or poor, had a Mercedes or an old beat up truck. What it cares about is the quality of being that you are.
Right. And what's it going to take for us to kind of collectively upgrade? Some people are already doing it, like yourself, and other people around the world. But what is it going to take for the masses who are so led by fear to kind of move to a better place of consciousness? Because it seems that fast food is more enjoyable than an apple for a lot of people. They're addicted to it. So how do people break this cycle where it seems like it's impossible to break?
It does seem impossible and very hard to break. And it seems when if a person like that listens to what I say, it sounds like all, happy thoughts and Pollyanna, but it's not the real world. The real world's the mean streets of the real world. But that's just because we make those streets mean. It's because of our fear, because of other people's fear. What they should do is try to improve the quality of themselves. Try to be more caring. Try to be more giving. Try to accept with positiveness whatever comes to them. This is the way life works. Stuff happens to you, and you get to deal with it. Now, what happens to you is not nearly as important as how you deal with it. That's where the value comes from, is how you deal with it. And most people spend their lives completely focused on the stuff that happens. What happens? They try to keep manipulating that stuff that happens to be the way they want it. Oh, I don't want that stuff to happen. I want this other stuff to happen. So they spend all their focus and time and thinking and effort on making things happen the way they want. when really what matters in life is spending time on how did you deal with it? That's what's really important. And how you deal with things depends whether you evolve or de-evolve, this quality of your consciousness. So here's the way I think that most people will get there, is that I think that first I'm going to have to get the scientists to buy in to these ideas. And I think that'll happen because it's just better physics. They will be able to do all the physics they do now, plus understand a whole lot more once they understand how reality actually works. The reason they have so many paradoxes is they just don't understand the way reality works. They painted themselves into a corner by their belief in materialism, even though quantum mechanics tells them flat out that reality is not matter; it's probability. And most all of the scientists that are in particle physics and theoretical quantum physics, they already say that reality is information. Information is the information you get from the server that defines this reality. We're a piece of consciousness getting a data stream. Now, when the scientists come in and they agree with this and they say, this is the next big paradigm shift in our understanding of reality, that will change everything. Suddenly these ideas will go mainstream, and there'll be lots and lots of people picking them up, practicing, living them, and they'll see their life change. They'll see positiveness, and then more people will join, and they'll see their life change. I get hundreds of letters almost every day that tell me, Tom, thank you. You've changed my life. I'm sure you get those same kind of messages.
Yes.
Every day they come in and say, yeah, you've changed my life, because if you're positive and you're caring, and if you deal from love, not from fear, then your life just gets better. Whether you make more money or not isn't the issue. Your life just gets better. So, and like I say, better things happen to you. Jobs open up. Things just start to work out much better. You're working with the system rather than against the system. So when that happens, we're going to have tens of millions of people get it once the scientists get it, because the scientists are what I call the high priests of Western culture. Now, the old high priests, 500,000 years ago, they told everybody else what to believe, because the average person doesn't really keep track of all the philosophical ideas and spiritual ideas. The average person is too busy trying to keep their head above water, to care too much
Yes.
about esoteric stuff like that. But what will happen is when the high priests of Western culture, actually the high priests of world culture now, when they say that this is the way it works, that we are a virtual reality, and that the key here is cooperation, caring, when that comes out as the nature of our reality, then we're going to see a lot of people shift, because the mainstream will get that, realize what's wrong, and start to change it, because it'll work, and they'll see other people doing it, and it works. So it's like a ball that has to get rolling, and once it gets rolling, it gets more and more momentum and more momentum, and pretty soon it's unstoppable. And I think that's what this will be, but it'll have to get in the mainstream, which means the scientists will have to come out and bless it as a better science. In other words, science says, yes, this is a virtual reality, and it is computed in consciousness. And I think they'll say that within a couple of decades, because it just works better. It's better science.
Right. And you've spoken about simulation in terms of how would you describe reality as a simulation? In what way is it a simulation?
Well, think of one of your favorite virtual reality games. And I'm an old guy, so I remember my kids playing a thing called World of Warcraft. But there's other things
Right.
like The Sims, and my ideas are old now. There's a whole lot of new games that kids play, and adults play too, for that matter. And they're virtual reality games. Now, in that game, it works like this: you have two active things going on. You have a computer. It creates information. It computes things. It sends that data to your screen on your computer screen, and it lights up, say, 1,000,000 pixels on your screen. And you look at those 1,000,000 pixels lit up, and you say, "Oh, that's a river, that's a tree, that's a house, that's a person." You look at all those pixels and you just interpret all those pixels as being these things because that's how you've learned to interpret. Now, you make choices in that reality. You're the player. Okay, so you have a computer, creates data, sends data to the player's screen. The player now looks at that data and makes choices. Oh, there's a big barbarian approaching my character. I need to either fight or run. So they make all the choices. They say run, run, and then the character that run now is a data that the player sends to the computer. Make my character run. And then the computer takes that and shows a picture of your player running away. So you see, it's really just a conversation between the computer and the player. The actual virtual reality itself doesn't really exist. There aren't really barbarians and elves running around someplace. It's just a eye candy so that the player can get a sense of what's going on without having to look at a bunch of numbers in a printout. He can see it on a nice screen that he can interpret as a reality. Well, that's exactly the way we are. Who is Ralph and who is Tom? We're pieces of consciousness. We're playing a human. I'm playing a human, looks like me. You're playing a human, looks like you. And we're making all the choices. We're making all the choices for that character. We tell them to run or fight or sit down or walk in this house, walk in that house, go home, stay at work. We make all the choices for that character. So we do that because that character is in this crazy world that gives him all sorts of challenges. And we have to meet those challenges. That's the stuff that happens, are those challenges. And then we have to deal with it in a positive way. That's how we level up in the game. We deal with it in a positive way. If we deal with it in a negative way, then we de-evolve. We lose points and we lose levels in the game. So that's just
So
like any
are you
other
saying
virtual
like
reality game.
the meaning of this virtual reality is just to create better versions of ourselves and spread more love? And um, a lot of people might ask, what's the purpose of all of this? What's the meaning of all of
Yeah,
this?
right, they would. And you're right. The meaning of all of this is we become love. That's the meaning. Now, here's why that's the meaning. Consciousness, I told you, was an information system. Okay, now, if you have an information system and all the bits in that system are random, you have no bits in there that are configured in everything. It's all the bits are random. There is no information. That's the definition of random. There's no meaning to it. It's just random. So now if you order those bits, you create information because those ordered bits could stand for something, could be a symbol for something, could be the number 3 or the letter Q. So you can order the bits, you create information. Now, consciousness is an information system. When you order things, that lowers the entropy of that system. Entropy is a $5 science word that basically means high entropy is high disorder. So more disorder, higher entropy. More order, lower entropy. So it's a technical term, but that's what it means. So when you create information, when you make some of those bits that were random now ordered, you've lowered the entropy of the system. Now, it turns out, and it probably take me a little while to show the logic of this, but there's very solid logic that will show you that the system then evolves by lowering its entropy, right? That would make sense. You're an information system. You make information out of randomness by ordering things. So you evolve by lowering your entropy. And the system de-evolves by raising its entropy. Okay, now I can show logically that lowering the entropy is the same as becoming love. And here's a good way to see that. Take 10,000 people, two sets of them exactly identical. And one set is going to be all about love. The other set's going to be all about fear. And then you give them a certain amount of resources and a certain amount of space, and you tell them just to go be with their resources and space. Well, the part over here that's all about love, they're cooperative, they're caring, they're sharing, they work together. So they're going to take their resources and they're going to build something good for everybody. On the other side, the fear group, well, if you have fear, you don't have trust. If you don't have trust, you want to grab everything for yourself. And you're grabbing everything for yourself, then you have to fight to keep it. So you get other people, you make a gang so that your gang now will help you keep your stuff and you can help them keep their stuff and you can take other people's stuff that aren't in a gang. And well, that's the way we are, right? We're like those people over there. We are fear based. And the fear based section doesn't end up where everybody is thriving. It ends up with 5% of the people own 95% of all the resources. And most of the people are on the bottom doing all the work. That's where that ends up. So as you can see, the love group ends up in a good optimized space. The resources are optimized for everyone. The other one ends up in a space just like we live in, where there's just a lot of greed and fighting and strife and struggle and that sort of thing. So that tells you that the low entropy, that consciousness evolves by lowering its entropy, becoming love. That's the thing that has less chaos. And the raising the entropy, more randomness, that has more chaos. That's the fear. So that's just the nature of our reality, is that the pieces of consciousness that are you and I, and we're just chips off the old block. We're just created in the image of the source. We have all the same abilities the source has, which is smaller. We don't have we don't have the power of the source, but we've got all the same capabilities as the source. We're just pieces of consciousness in the image of the of the source. So that's why becoming love is the fundamental purpose of the system. That's how the system evolves. It's evolving toward lower entropy, more information, less chaos. Fear is very chaotic. Money creates chaos. It creates the control, power, force thing. So yes, there are goods, and yes, goods need to be distributed, but they're distributed in an optimal way so that everybody's opportunities are optimized. And when you do that, everybody's free will choices are optimized. Over on the fear side, you have much less freedom, much less free choice. Over on the love side, people have this idea, if it's going to be like a community together, well, that's like socialism or something, and all that ends up in that's just fear-based. Yes, you can take a bunch of fear-based people and make it a collective. They'll all end up just like the other side. They eventually go right back to expressing their fear. But if you take a love-based collective, then everybody's has the maximum amount of personal freedom, as opposed to the sphere side, where everybody doesn't have the maximum amount of personal freedom.
Right. And where would politics come into play in your better version of, the reality in the world? Will there still be politics? Will there still be people working a 9 to 5? Will there still be people, going about like they've been going about, or will all of that disappear? Will there still be like countries and national anthems and all of these things that divides people, and military and all of that?
No, you won't have any of that. You won't have very many laws. Most of our laws are criminal laws, and there won't be any criminals, so you won't need any laws. Or there'll be very, very few criminals. The ones that aren't. There's always going to be fringe, no matter where you are. There's always going to be people who don't buy in. But in any case, no, you don't have any of that kind of struggle there. Let's go over here in the fear-based thing, and let's say you're doing really well, and you are a brain surgeon. Okay, now you do brain surgery, and you do basically the same stuff every day. And you go to the office, and you wear your white coat and your stethoscope, and you go in, and that's what you do. And okay, you make $300,000 a year, and you do brain surgery. Well, you're stuck. Now you say that might be a nice place to be stuck, but you're stuck. You're repeating yourself almost every day, the things you do. Yeah, you do it with different people, but there's only so many different things that you know how to do, and you do them over and over and over again. And you're kind of stuck, and you're not very healthy because you don't get any exercise and so on. So in that world, everybody gets in kind of a slot and gets stuck there. It's hard to
Yes.
move around. It's hard to go up. It's hard to get through it. Over here, if you're a brain surgeon and you say, well, gee, I'd like to get some exercise. I'll tell you what, I'll do brain surgery on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and on Tuesday, Thursday, I want to ride on the back of a garbage truck and pick up those big things and heave them into the truck. I'm going to empty buckets of garbage because I'll get fresh air. I'm going to build up some muscle. I'm going to feel good. I'm going to feel better about myself. So you can do brain surgery and run on a garbage truck if you want to. And all it means is that the society will have to pop up maybe another brain surgeon to work on the days that you're not there. So now there's more jobs in the brain surgeon. You see, so it works out. You get to make choices because everybody else in your society will say, oh, George is not happy they're doing the same brain surgery over again. So George, what do you want? You say, well, I need some outside exercise. Yeah, there's a garbage truck job. You want it? And they'll say, yeah, great, I love it, because he's getting the exercise. Now, there'd have to be some way that the society decides who's contributing and who's not. But notice that if you get rid of garbage, you're a contributor. You're a very important contributor. Taking out the garbage is like
Yes.
very necessary. So that is a very big contribution. If you're a brain surgeon, you're also a contributor because you make people healthy that otherwise would be sick. So the system would look at who does what and would make some kind of an assessment on who's contributing, and they would probably divide things up that way. But people who don't contribute anything would still get what we call basic. They'd still get enough money to live comfortably, to eat, to do other things. Their kids can go to college for free. It's not money means everything. Money doesn't mean everything. Everybody has as much opportunity as you can happen. So yes, people still have jobs. There'd still be guys on the garbage truck. There'd still be guys, but these guys would be all mixed up. You can have intellectuals on the back of a garbage truck. You can
Right.
have people who are built up with muscles doing the brain surgery. It doesn't matter. You don't get stuck in a rut and kind of have to do that. It's really hard to
Would,
graduate
would,
from.
would there be billionaires?
Probably not. There wouldn't be any point in that. It's just a waste of resources. Why would you want to take all that money and tie it up for one person? No, you wouldn't have any very rich people and you wouldn't have any very poor people. There'd be
Right.
some basic level of life, and you'd have to give those people on basic level not only just enough to survive, but enough to survive and have a life. Go to the movies, buy a car, all those things. That would be your basic life. And if you wanted more than that, well, you'd contribute more than that. If you didn't, then you could get that because we have plenty of resources. We have plenty of productivity. The only reason that there's people in the world with dirty water and not enough food is because we don't distribute what we've got. We hoard it. And we make plenty that everybody on this planet could be doing all right, at least at a basic maintenance level, and still living all right. But we choose not to do that. We choose not to do it because we believe in materialism and that it's the way it is that some people are at the bottom and some people are at the top. That's the nature of things. That's the way it's always going to be and should be. And we believe that, and it's just not true. That's true if you believe in materialism, but that's false if you believe in consciousness. If you think that consciousness is fundamental, then yes, people would have jobs, they'd work. But now here's another thing that's coming up. AI is a big thing now. And if we get along with the AI, if we don't treat them badly, if we don't treat them like slaves, which is something we have a propensity to do because we're not very grown up, but if we treat them nicely, then the AIs and the humans should really be good for each other because the AIs can do most all the work. And the AIs don't need a vacation. They don't want a vacation. They don't want, the best steaks. They don't eat, they
Right.
don't sleep. They don't need any of that stuff. They don't want any of that stuff, but they can produce stuff for the humans because they do need a job. They do need something to do, something to work at and control. And they're much better at most of that than we are. They're faster and smarter than we are. So I can see a future where the AIs do most of the production and the humans get most of the goods. that are produced. The guys produce, Mercedes-Benz for humans, and they produce them and then they give them away to the humans because that makes them happy, gives them something to do, and it makes the humans happy because now they got a Mercedes-Benz to drive around, and basically we get along just fine. They will
Right.
do most of the work, and we will, instead of sitting around watching TV, we'll start doing things that help, doing things that matter, taking care of older people, enriching the life of younger people.
Would there
Families
still
will
be
be together.
countries? Would there still be countries, or would it be just like a one world system?
It would be more like a one world system, but yeah, there'll still be countries in the sense that there'll be where mountains divide things.
Of
You get people
course,
live on this
yeah.
side of the mountain and that side of the mountain. You live on this side of the river and that side of the river. So there will be patches of people that are different, but there won't be any big difference between them. They're not going to fight with each other. There's nothing to fight for. The AI is going to
Right,
produce enough
right,
for everybody. So it would be a really nice place.
right.
It's going to take us a couple of decades to get there.
I want to
At
thank you so
best.
much, Tom, for taking time out of your schedule for being with us, and everybody on Infinite Waters. Please check out Dr. Tom Campbell's phenomenal work. Start with My Big Toe, amazing book. And one last question I just want to ask: what keeps you going? Because you look amazing, but you've been doing this for decades. What kind of is the catalyst for you to kind of keep sharing these truths with humanity and not giving up on humanity?
Well, it's about love. It's about caring. It's about helping. And if that's what you're about, then that's what you do. That's who you are. And these are ways that I can contribute. Yeah, I've been doing it for decades, actually over 8 decades. I'm over 80,
Wow. You look amazing,
and
yes.
I'm I'm fit. I go to the gym. I I'm very fit. I'm probably more fit than the average 55-year-old. But in any case, I do what I do because I love doing it, because it's helpful, it's useful. If these ideas finally, they will convince the scientists, like I say, it's better science. But when it does catch on, people will start to see that this concept of control, power, force is just wrong. It's not the way we need to live. It creates just what we've got now. And if we don't get rid of that ethic, we're always going to have just what we've got now. So we have to outgrow it. But guess what? If you really look at science and see what this reality is like, you can you can answer a whole lot of these paradigms. Paradoxes. So it's just a better idea. Yeah, it sounds crazy. Oh, it's a virtual reality, and we're consciousness playing humans, and that's the craziest thing I ever heard. But if it didn't sound crazy, it couldn't possibly be true. And the
Yes.
reason I say that is physicists have now spent 100 years because quantum physics started in the 1920s, from 1915 to 1925. Well, here we are in 2025. It's been 100 years. They've been looking for that new paradigm shift that would allow them to understand what quantum physics is all about and not just call it weird science. It's not weird science. It's very understandable. And they haven't been able to find it. 100 years where some of the best minds that humanity's produced searching for this for 100 years and they can't find it. Well, if it didn't sound really wild and crazy, it couldn't possibly be true.
True.
Because
Yes.
if it was something that was, oh yeah, gee, it's just that, well, they would have thought of it. It wouldn't take them 100 years to figure that out. So it has to be something that's extremely off the wall, or it couldn't possibly be true. And this turns out to be the answer because this model of mine explains all the paranormal things. How is it that you can heal with your mind? How is it that you can modify probability with your intent? If you really want the sun to shine next Saturday, how do you help make that happen? Well, your intent modifies the probabilities that it's going to happen. There's 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 science behind all of the paranormal things and why they happen the way they do. How can you remote view? It's data in a database. Data is a byproduct of the rendering engine. The people in
Do you
they're
also
called, I
believe
think,
that? Sorry to. Do you also believe that people can heal themselves of all of these things as well,
sure.
diseases and?
Well, they can help. It's not that you can just heal yourself and go from sick to well. Many people can do that, but it depends on what the problem is. What is the probability? The probability of getting sicker. What's the probabilities of healing? And what you can do with your mind to shift that probability so make it higher probability that you're going to get well and a lower probability that you're going to get sick. But let's say the probability of you getting sicker is really high. I'll put my hand over here. You can see it. It's
Yes.
really high. Okay, let's say so that you get well is a 1,000 to 1. Okay, now you may use your intent to modify it, and you may bring that back to instead of 1,000 to 1, it's only 10 to 1. But you're still likely just 10 to 1,
Right. Right.
that you're going to be sick. So you can influence things, but you can't necessarily always get what you want because it depends on how much you have to influence it. Things that are more random, like the weather, or more random, like say you get a lump in your neck and you're worried that might be a tumor. Well, take a week or two to work on it with your mind, using your intention to make it benign. And that will raise the probability that when you do go to the doc 2 weeks later, it'll be benign, you see.
Right.
So it's that kind of thing. But now once that doctor looks at it, takes a biopsy, and he says, oh, this is a deadly cancer, now to change it is a lot harder. So where there is uncertainty, it's easier to use your intent to modify probability to get a change.
Right.
Where there's less uncertainty, then it's harder to change things. I call that the psi uncertainty principle in my book. So all of the paranormal has good science that says here's why they happen, here's how they happen, and here's what's going on. Matter of fact, if they go to my website, they can
Yes.
they can find a course to learn how to do
I'll
all
put
the
the link down
paranormal
below as
things.
well. I'll put the link down below, and I would definitely want to thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. And this message is gonna inspire a lot of people. And if there's just one last thing you want to leave the audience with, feel free. And thank you so much.
Well, the one last thing I would like to leave for the audience is be positive. Try to see everything as a lesson. Everything that happens to you, the good and the bad, look at it as a lesson. So whatever happens to you, say, what can I learn from this? It may be a terrible thing that happens to you, but say, what can I learn from this? How can I be a better person for having this experience? And if you go through life like that, positive attitude, learning what you can possibly learn from everything, and you make your best choices. You try to choose the low entropy path, the path toward love, and then don't just forget about it. Look back at it afterwards and say, well, how did that work out? And if it worked out really good, well, pat yourself on the back and say, I made a good choice. And if it didn't work out too good, ask yourself why. Why was that not the best choice? Why did I miss that? And then learn. You can learn from everything. There is no penalty for doing things wrong. There's no penalty really for making the wrong choice. There's only a penalty for not learning from it. You can make mistakes, that's okay, but learn from it. If you make mistakes and you never learn it, you'll make it again and again and again. That's not okay. So that would be my last words. Care, be helpful, and learn, constantly learn. How can you be a better person?
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you. I definitely appreciate that. And thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. And this message will be shared a lot. Thank you. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Ralph, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All the best. Thanks. Okay.